This is what it felt like to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder and OCD. My name is Vicky and I make videos about my experience with bipolar disorder and OCD and mental health in general, how it affects my everyday life. And today I'll be talking about what exactly it felt like. So if you watch my videos, you might know that I was diagnosed with these mental illnesses alongside some learning disabilities whenever I was 17 years old. And that was a very, very difficult time in my life. And specifically those moments where I was told by the doctors, you have this, you have this, you have this. They were really, really, really hard moments that definitely marked me in my life. So obviously, I think in today's world, mental health is something that is talked about so much more than it used to be. I think post-COVID, there was like a lot of open dialogue regarding mental health. That is not to say that we still have a long way to go, because we definitely do. But I don't know, I think that before this time happened, it was a little bit harder to be so open about mental illness and those types of struggles, especially because society had so much stigma, still does, but even more back then, had so much stigma regarding these topics and what it meant and labels and so on. So taking you guys back into the moment when I'm being diagnosed, during that year, my mental illness or my mental health had been deteriorating more and more each day. I was extremely depressed. I was having suicidal ideation. I was not okay. My moods were here up and down and sad and okay and like just all these types of things. My anxiety was skyrocketing. I had anxiety, like panic attacks. It was just kind of all over the place. Meanwhile, at school, I was really struggling with like how long it took me to take tests and focusing and just being able to accomplish different things. And so I felt like in that area, I had to work 2 to 3 times harder than my peers in order to get the same good grades. And I have always been a person that's been super responsible, good at school. So those things were definitely really important to me. But it was really, really hard to manage my everyday life with the big burden of depression, anxiety, and just these learning difficulties. So my parents, obviously, they've always been really supportive, and I've been really lucky to have that, because I know that that's not something that everybody gets to have. But they did take me to the psychiatrist. They took me to get some tests done for, dyslexia, ADHD, OCD, like all these things to make sure we could understand what was wrong and what we could do to, improve, to make my life a little easier. So basically, I'm going to a psychiatrist. That was the first stop of the whole journey of getting diagnosed. I go to the psychiatrist. It's the first time I go to a psychiatrist, and he's like, okay, he analyzes me and says, you might have depression, so we're gonna be putting you, I think it was Prozac. Again, there's all these medications, they react differently, like everybody's different and all that kind of stuff. I'm no doctor, but Prozac was the first thing that I was put on. And fine, right? Like I start taking Prozac. At the moment, again, there's no defined diagnosis. We're still figuring it out. And Prozac kind of makes me have a hypomanic episode. I started taking it. 2 to 3 days later, I am just on basically a high. Like I was just so happy, so excited. Like I had very, very big feelings, like grandiose feelings. Like everything was just super amazing, super great. And other like symptoms that my parents definitely noticed, I didn't, because I was feeling on top of the world. So obviously we go back to the doctor, and he says, typically whenever a patient has this type of reaction to this medication, it's an indication that it's not simply depression, and this could be bipolar disorder. I remember hearing those words and I was like, is this man crazy? Why would I have bipolar disorder, right? Like, why? Like, that is, I'm not crazy. Like, those were kind of the thoughts that I was having. I'm not crazy. And, bipolar is the word that I use for somebody who's like, who's cold and like then warm in one day, obviously the stigma where people are like, oh, you're so bipolar. All these thoughts were coming across in my mind. So I was just like, I was kind of shocked, but like, I didn't really believe it. Now, neither did my parents. They were like, that's not possible, like bipolar disorder, like there's just not enough education on what that was, what it meant, and so much more. So they decided to take me to a second opinion, and we go to a second psychiatrist who confirms it again. Yes, this is bipolar disorder. Obviously, he does like a very detailed analysis of like, what is going on and all that kind of stuff, like why he believes that that is my diagnosis. And so I remember sitting in the couch in that moment, and his room was kind of like dim. He had like a very like old couch. Like, I don't know, in the movies when they put like older, like, I don't know, older rooms. And he has my parents come in and he tells them, she has bipolar disorder, and he spoke Spanish, and like he was Colombian. So I think that helped also culturally with my parents, because when you're, with somebody from the same culture, it's easier to digest that type of information. So he says that, and I think we're all kind of shocked. Like, I think there was like a lot of thoughts racing in my mind, like, I'm crazy, nobody's gonna love me, what is wrong with me, nobody can ever know, like, will I take medications for the rest of my life? Like, what does this mean for me, for finding love, for living a normal life, for happiness? Like, it was just so scary, and I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I felt incredibly scared and sad. I felt kind of hopeless. Even though the doctor was saying, hey, there's these medications, there's this treatment that we're gonna try, and you will feel better, you will get better. So after that initial shock, I also saw that it was really hard on my parents. Again, this is a moment where stigma is really, really high. And there's things like, don't share it with the family, like the extended family, do not like talk about it, like this and that. It's not really something that you should tell people. And that was really difficult. As well with my parents were like, no, you probably don't have that. Like, there was just, they were also trying their best to cope with this diagnosis, but it was really difficult. Not too long after that, I believe it was after, I think it was after, not too long after that, I go and get a whole analysis on, for learning disabilities, and because I was struggling to read, so I can read and all that kind of stuff, but I'm much slower at reading than other people, both in Spanish and in English, and I can skip words and skip letters. I have like, I misspell a lot of things, like, with dyslexia, like sometimes like I'll switch letters. Anyway, it was something that was truly affecting me in school. I think at work nowadays, not so much, like, you're not having to write down so many things like before. But it was something that was really affecting me, because in exams, it would take me longer to take them. I was also having a really hard time to focus. To this day, I don't know if that was truly ADHD or if it was like I was going through depression, and then that was like the reason why I couldn't focus. I think those things can get pretty blurry, but in that diagnosis, there was also like, the OCD aspect of it, which they also touched on. So again, I'm on a couch in a room, and this person who is doing this test for me starts reading the results out. And she's like, you do have dyslexia, you do have ADHD, you do have OCD. Like, they're saying all these things. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, what else can be wrong with me? Like, I am just the most flawed person, unlovable person. Like, why am I even here? What am I gonna do with my life? So that was hard. I remember like trying to not cry in front of this person. I was with my dad at the moment. I was trying to not cry with this person, in front of this person. But I remember getting to the car, and I remember being with my dad and just crying. Like, I just started crying so much, because it was like, how do I deal with these emotions? I'm a teenager at this point, right? I'm like 17. I have all the pressures of school, of family, of who I am. Like, what am I doing with my life? Like, will this impact my career? Will this impact like how far I can get along in life? Will this impact my children in the future, if I can have them? So like, it was just really scary. But I think as time went on, I started to accept it more, especially when I saw that the medications were working. So I was put into bipolar medications. I think it was Seroquel, lamotrigine, and I don't remember the name of the ADHD medication I was put on, but I was heavily medicated at that point, which, that's a little controversial. I'm taking way less medications nowadays, but I think maybe it was needed in order to get me out of the hole that I was in at the moment. I started to get better. I still struggled with who I was in my identity post-diagnosis, but I think with time, I accepted it so much. I think it took my parents a little longer, but I was getting better. I was like, okay, it kind of makes sense that I have this diagnosis because I am getting better. And so I kept going with my medications. We did eventually get a third opinion, and that was a little messy, but my life did get better. And throughout time, my parents also became much more accepting. So the thing is, my parents were always supportive. They just struggled with the labels, I would say. And that is totally normal, because you don't want your child to, one, be judged by society, two, be struggling with these things. But I think it's important to note that labels, like how we get labeled with a mental illness or with disabilities, it's just a name to pinpoint what is happening in our brain so we can get the right medication, so we can get the right treatment, really. So I started to try to detach myself from those labels a little bit so I could better cope with it all. Eventually, clearly, I shared with the world what I had. I shared it with my family and close friends right before I was going to publish this video. Obviously, my best friends knew at the time. I also told my now husband, but it was still like a pretty touchy subject. But I feel like, that journey taught me so much about myself, and it's so important to accept who we are for who we are, and to remember that life does get better. There are treatment options, and we are still lovable even with this, and we are still able to be successful in life and happy. So yeah, that's kind of my journey on getting diagnosed and my road to acceptance. I really hope that this video, you found it some helpful if you're going through this, or if you know somebody who is going through this. And always remember that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and a bad day does not mean a bad life.